The setting suns painted streaks of crimson and gold across the sky of New Haven, but Ethan Blackwood barely noticed the spectacular display. 6 years of watching the same sunset had dulled its wonder. He stood at the viewport of his fortified outpost, methodically checking the perimeter sensors as he did every evening. The terraformed planet was perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. Hostile enough to discourage casual visitors, but viable enough to sustain life with the right equipment. Most importantly, it was far from Earth and the memories that haunted him. Ethan's hand unconsciously touched the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a reminder of the Battle of Proxima, where his command decisions had resulted in the deaths of over 200 soldiers. The official inquiry had cleared him of wrongdoing, but the weight of those lives drove him to this self-imposed exile. The perimeter alarm shattered his evening routine. A ship was approaching, its engine signature unfamiliar. Ethan activated his defense systems, watching as the sleek vessel struggled to maintain altitude. Its silver hull bore the distinctive markings of Valoran design, elegant and advanced, like everything their species created. The ship crashed 3 kilometers from his outpost, carving a trench through the rocky terrain. Ethan considered ignoring it. He'd chosen this life of isolation for a reason. But when his sensors detected more ships entering the atmosphere, military vessels with weapons hot, his military training kicked in. "Computer, prep the rescue speeder," he ordered, already moving to his armory. Minutes later, he was racing across the barren landscape, the crashed ship's emergency beacon guiding him. The pursuing vessels would arrive in approximately 18 minutes. He found the crash site easily enough. The ship had held together remarkably well, a testament to Valoran engineering. As he approached, the emergency hatch opened, and a figure emerged. Ethan's breath caught. She was clearly Valoran, tall and graceful, with the characteristic silvery skin that seemed to shimmer in the fading sunlight. But it was her bearing that made him curse under his breath. Everything about her screamed royalty, from her elaborate clothing to the way she held herself despite obvious injury. "Stay where you are," Ethan called out in Galactic Standard, his pulse rifle raised. "Identify yourself." The Valoran woman turned, her iridescent eyes widening slightly at his appearance. "I am Princess Astrid of House Valor. I claim the right of sanctuary under the Galactic Accord." Ethan's tactical mind was already calculating. A Valoran princess, this far from the Empire's borders, with armed pursuit. This had all the markings of a political assassination attempt. The exact kind of complication he'd fled to New Haven to avoid. "Your Highness, you have about 16 minutes before those ships reach us. If you want to live, you need to trust me and do exactly as I say." He lowered his weapon slightly. "Can you run in that outfit?" Astrid glanced down at her ceremonial robes, then back at him with a hint of what might have been amusement. "I suppose I'll have to." She reached down and tore away the restricting lower portion of her garment with practiced ease. "Lead the way, human." They made it halfway to his outpost before the first energy blasts struck the ground behind them. Ethan pushed Astrid behind a rocky outcropping, returning fire with precise bursts. His shots forced their pursuers to take cover, buying precious seconds. "Those aren't Imperial troops," Astrid said, her breath coming in controlled bursts. "They're mercenaries hired by the Shadowborn Coalition." "Political rivals?" "They're trying to prevent me from reaching Earth with evidence of Dash." An explosion cut off her words, showering them with debris. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Save the exposition. We need to move. My outpost has better defenses." He tapped his wrist computer. "Computer, activate Protocol 7. Authorization, Blackwood Alpha 9." In the distance, hidden defense turrets emerged from the rocky ground, their automated targeting systems engaging the pursuing ships. The distraction worked, forcing the attackers to deal with the unexpected resistance. They reached the outpost's main entrance as the first ship exploded overhead, raining burning debris across the landscape. Ethan sealed the blast doors behind them, engaging every security measure he'd installed over the years. Inside, Astrid braced herself against a wall, finally allowing exhaustion to show on her features. A thin line of silvery blood ran from a cut on her forehead. "Thank you," she said formally. "I believe I owe you my life, Mr. Blackwood." Ethan Blackwood. He moved to his monitoring station, checking the defensive readouts. "Former Commander, Earth Defense Fleet." He turned to face her. "Now, Your Highness, I think it's time you told me exactly what kind of trouble you've brought to my doorstep." The medbay's soft blue light cast gentle shadows across Princess Astrid's silvery skin as Ethan treated her minor injuries from the crash. The Valoran royal sat perfectly still, her iridescent eyes watching his every move with careful consideration. "Your medical facilities are impressive for a hermit's outpost," she observed, wincing slightly as he sealed a cut on her forearm. "When you live alone on the edge of civilized space, you learn to be prepared." Ethan checked the perimeter sensors again. The mercenary ships still circled in high orbit, but hadn't launched another attack since their failed ground assault. "Though I wasn't exactly prepared for harboring alien royalty." Former alien royalty, technically. At his questioning look, Astrid's skin rippled with what he was learning to recognize as the Valoran equivalent of a bitter smile. It's difficult to maintain one's royal status when branded a traitor. Ethan set aside the medical equipment and leaned against his workbench. "About that. You still haven't told me what kind of trouble you've brought to my doorstep, Your Highness." Astrid stood, moving to the observation window with fluid grace. The binary stars of New Haven were setting, painting the barren landscape in shades of crimson and gold. "What do you know about Project Oracle?" The name sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Classified research. Deep space exploration technology. Even as fleet commander, I only had peripheral awareness. That's the official story. Astrid pulled a data crystal from a hidden compartment in her boot. The reality is somewhat darker. Project Oracle isn't about exploration, it's about weapons development. Specifically, weapons designed to trigger a war between our species. She inserted the crystal into his computer terminal. Holographic displays sprang to life, showing weapon schematics, classified communications, and surveillance footage. Ethan's military experience let him grasp the implications immediately. These weren't defensive systems, they were first-strike weapons designed to bypass both human and Valoran shields. The Shadowborn Coalition, Astrid continued, is a conspiracy of war profiteers from both our civilizations. They've been orchestrating incidents along our borders, trying to increase tensions. She paused, watching his reaction carefully. Including the Battle of Proxima. Ethan's hand unconsciously moved to the scar on his face. "That's impossible. We were responding to a distress call from a civilian research station. A station deliberately attacked by disguised ships, using prototype weapons that would appear to be of Valoran origin." Her voice softened. "Commander, you and your soldiers were set up to fail. They needed a human military leader to make a tragic mistake, to help justify increased military spending and aggressive policies." The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. 217 deaths, 6 years of self-imposed exile, all engineered by conspirators pushing for war. His hands clenched into fists as memories of that day flooded back. A proximity alarm shattered the moment. "Multiple ground contacts," Ethan reported, moving to the tactical display. "They're deploying troops again. At least 30 combat units this time. They're getting desperate." Astrid moved to the weapons locker, selecting a Valoran pulse rifle with practiced ease. At his raised eyebrow, she smiled slightly. "All Valoran royalty undergo military training. Though I admit, most of my experience is in simulators." "Simulators don't shoot back," Ethan warned, but he was impressed by her stance and weapon handling. The outpost's communications system chimed. Incoming transmission, the computer announced. Origin, Valeran diplomatic frequency. They shared a look. A diplomatic channel could mean help had arrived, or their enemies had brought reinforcements. Ethan activated the comm system, keeping weapons ready. A holographic figure materialized, a Valeran male wearing elaborate military dress. Astrid's reaction was immediate and visceral, her skin losing all color. "Uncle Valen," she said, her voice cold. "I should have known you'd be involved." The Valeran smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for a diplomat. "My dear niece. You've led us on quite a chase. I've come to bring you home." His gaze shifted to Ethan. "Commander Blackwood, I apologize for my niece involving you in our family dispute. Turn her over to my custody, and you have my word that no harm will come to you." Ethan studied the hologram carefully. This was the kind of moment he'd run from 6 years ago, the weight of decisions that affected more than just himself. He looked at Astrid, saw the steely determination in her otherworldly eyes, then back at her uncle's predatory smile. He'd spent 6 years hiding from his past, from responsibility, from everything except his own guilt. But he hadn't run from the Battle of Proxima because he was a coward. He'd run because he couldn't bear the weight of failing those who trusted him. He wasn't going to fail again. "With respect, Your Excellency," Ethan said, already entering commands into his security system, "I don't think I'll be doing that." Valen's diplomatic veneer cracked slightly. "Don't be a fool, Commander. You can't hope to." Ethan cut the transmission. "Your Highness, I hope you're ready for some real combat experience. We've got about 10 minutes before they breach the outer defenses." Astrid chambered a round in her rifle, her movements precise despite the lack of actual combat experience. "Just remember, Commander, I'm a quick learner." Another explosion rocked the outpost. Through the observation window, they could see troops advancing through the gathering darkness, their weapons glowing with deadly intent. The battle for New Haven, and possibly the peace between their species, was about to begin. Energy blasts illuminated the darkened corridors of the outpost as Ethan and Astrid fought their way toward the hidden hangar. The princess moved with surprising agility, her simulator training translating better to real combat than Ethan had expected. She took up positions without being told, covered angles instinctively, and most importantly, she listened. "2 more on your left," Ethan called out, laying down suppressing fire as mercenaries tried to flank their position. Astrid pivoted smoothly, her pulse rifle spitting blue energy that dropped both attackers with stunning precision. "Non-lethal shots," she explained, catching his glance. "Center mass, nervous system disruption. They'll wake up with headaches, nothing more." Ethan couldn't help but be impressed. Even under fire, she was thinking about diplomatic implications. "Your Highness, I doubt they're extending us the same courtesy. Which is why history will remember who started this war, Commander, and who tried to prevent it." She paused at a junction, checking corners. "How much further to this ship of yours?" An explosion rocked the corridor behind them, and emergency barriers began slamming down. Ethan cursed. "They've breached the main power core. We've got maybe 5 minutes before backup systems fail." He gestured to a maintenance shaft. "This way. It's going to get cramped." They crawled through service tunnels as the outpost systems failed around them. Ethan had built this place to withstand almost anything, but a coordinated assault by professional mercenaries with military-grade weapons was pushing its limits. The backup lighting cast everything in a red glow, making Astrid's silvery skin look almost blood-like. "Tell me about Project Oracle," Ethan said as they moved, partly to distract her from their dire situation, partly because he needed to understand. "Why would your uncle risk war between our species?" "Power," Astrid replied, her voice tight as they squeezed through a narrow passage. "The Valeran Empire is changing. My father, the Emperor, has been pushing for closer ties with Earth, even discussing a formal alliance. But there are those who believe we should remain separate, pure. She made a sound that might have been disgust. They're willing to sacrifice millions to maintain their ideology of superiority. They emerged into a larger maintenance bay. Ethan moved to a seemingly solid wall and pressed his hand against a hidden scanner. A seam appeared in the metal, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. "The hangar's at the bottom," he said, "already moving. But they'll be expecting us to have an escape route. This won't be easy." Astrid checked her weapons charge. "Nothing worth doing ever is, Commander." The hidden hangar was vast, carved directly into the bedrock beneath the outpost. And there, waiting in the center like a predatory bird, was Ethan's secret, the EDF Phantom, an experimental stealth corvette he'd borrowed when he left the fleet. Its black hull seemed to drink in what little light reached it. "Impressive," Astrid breathed. "Quantum stealth plating, modified engine configuration, and unless I miss my guess, those weapon ports aren't standard issue." "A girl who knows her ships," Ethan said, unable to keep the appreciation from his voice. "She's not pretty, but she's fast and she hits hard. And right now." The hangar's massive doors exploded inward. Through the smoke and debris, armored figures poured in, weapons raised. And behind them strode Uncle Valen himself, his ceremonial armor gleaming. "I must admit, Commander," Valen called out, his voice carrying easily across the hangar, "I'm impressed by your hidden facilities. But did you really think we wouldn't detect the power signatures down here?" He spread his arms in a gesture that might have been conciliatory. "Come now, Astrid. Enough of this foolishness. Think of your position, your duty to our people." "I am thinking of our people," Astrid replied, her voice ringing with authority that seemed to fill the vast space. "All of our people, Valeran and human alike. The evidence I carry proves you and your coalition have been manipulating both sides, trying to trigger a war that would kill millions." "Peace makes us weak," Valen snarled, his diplomatic mask slipping. "Look at you, consorting with humans, fighting alongside them. Your father's policies are diluting everything that makes us superior. The only thing superior about you, Uncle, is your capacity for self-delusion." Astrid's skin rippled with patterns that Ethan recognized as extreme emotion. "Commander, I hope you have a plan." Ethan was already moving, keying commands into his wrist computer. "Remember those power signatures your uncle mentioned? They're not all from the ship." The hangar floor erupted as hidden defense turrets emerged, catching Valen's forces in devastating crossfire. In the chaos, Ethan grabbed Astrid's arm and ran for the Phantom's boarding ramp. Energy blasts sizzled past them as they dove inside. "Get us airborne!" Astrid shouted, laying down covering fire from the ramp. Ethan's hands flew across the controls, bringing the ship's systems online. The Phantom's engines roared to life, lifting the sleek vessel from the hangar floor. Through the view screen, he could see Valen shouting orders, his forces regrouping. "Hang on to something," Ethan warned, powering up the main guns. "This is going to be messy." The Phantom's weapons opened up, not at Valen's troops, but at the hangar ceiling. Massive chunks of rock began falling as the structural integrity failed. In the confusion, Ethan pointed the ship straight up, toward the newly created hole, and fired the main engines. They burst from the collapsing hangar like a bullet from a gun, accelerating hard toward the night sky. Astrid made her way to the co-pilot's seat, her movements sure despite the ship's erratic course. "Multiple pursuit craft launching," she reported, reading the tactical display. "And the blockade ships are moving to intercept." Ethan's hands danced across the controls, pushing the Phantom into a series of maneuvers that would have torn a lesser ship apart. "Plot us a course to that diplomatic outpost you mentioned. We're not out of this yet." As if to emphasize his point, energy beams from the blockade ships lit up the space around them. The Phantom dove and weaved, its stealth systems working to break weapons locks, but they were heavily outnumbered. "Course plotted," Astrid announced. "But we'll never break through their formation. Ethan allowed himself a grim smile. Want to bet? He keyed the ship-wide comm, secure for combat maneuvers. This is where things get interesting. The Phantom rocketed toward the blockade, its engines pushing to maximum thrust. The real fight for survival, and for the future of human-Valoran relations, was about to begin. The Phantom shuddered as another energy blast grazed its shields. In the cockpit, Ethan's hands flew across the controls, pushing the experimental ship through maneuvers that defied conventional space combat tactics. Beside him, Astrid managed the weapons and defensive systems with remarkable skill for someone who'd never been on a combat vessel before. 3 escorts breaking formation to pursue, she reported, her iridescent eyes scanning tactical displays. Their targeting systems are having trouble maintaining lock, but they're compensating with volume of fire. Ethan rolled the ship through a corkscrew maneuver, using the Phantom's advanced stealth systems to confuse enemy tracking. They're not trying to destroy us, he noted, watching the pattern of enemy fire. Your uncle wants us captured, not killed. He needs the evidence I'm carrying destroyed in a way that can't be traced back to him. Astrid's fingers danced across her console, redirecting shield power. Though I suspect he'd shed no tears if his troublesome niece didn't survive the attempt. The ship rocked again as a bolt struck home. Warning indicators flashed across the main display, the stealth systems were taking a beating, and their pursuers were adapting to their evasion patterns. We need options, Ethan muttered, more to himself than Astrid. They couldn't outrun the blockade forever, and while the Phantom was well armed, they couldn't fight their way through the entire fleet. Tell me more about this diplomatic outpost. What kind of defenses are we looking at? Minimal, Astrid replied, firing a spread of countermeasures to break an incoming missile lock. It was officially abandoned during the recent border tensions, but the quantum communicator should still be functional. If we can reach it, we can transmit the evidence directly to both our governments simultaneously. No one could suppress the information then. Ethan's tactical mind was already working the problem. The outpost was 3 days away at normal speeds, through contested space. They had maybe 6 hours of fuel for combat maneuvering, and their pursuers could easily call in reinforcements. They needed something unexpected. The ship's sensors chimed a warning. Energy spike. Astrid called out. They're powering up something big. Through the view screen, Ethan saw one of the larger blockade ships opening its bow panels, revealing what looked like a massive energy projector. His eyes widened as he recognized the design from Astrid's evidence files, prototype weaponry from Project Oracle. Brace for emergency maneuvers, he warned, already throwing the ship into a desperate evasive pattern. The enemy weapon fired, and space itself seemed to distort. Instead of a normal energy beam, it released a wave of quantum disruption, designed to disable ships without destroying them. The Phantom's experimental hull absorbed most of the impact, but systems across the ship flickered and failed. They were dropping out of formation, vulnerable to conventional weapons. Through the chaos of alarms and emergency lights, Ethan noticed something on his tactical display, a gravitational anomaly, barely within range. Your Highness, he said, his voice tense with concentration, how do you feel about something incredibly reckless? Astrid's skin rippled with what he now recognized as excitement. Commander, I'm starting to think those are your specialty. Ethan fired the remaining functional thrusters, pushing them toward the anomaly. The pursuing ships hesitated, probably wondering if their quarry had been more damaged than expected, flying randomly. Then understanding seemed to dawn on their tactical officers. They're breaking off pursuit, Astrid reported. They think we're about to destroy ourselves. They might be right. Ethan targeted the anomaly with the ship's sensors, feeding data into the navigation computer. That's a Class 2 quantum eddy. Highly unstable, typically fatal to anything that enters it. But if my calculations are right, and if this ship is as good as I think it is. Astrid caught on to his plan. The quantum disruption from their weapon, it's destabilized the eddy's normal patterns. And with the Phantom's experimental hull, we might be able to ride the currents. Ethan allowed himself a grim smile. It's a gamble, but if it works, we'll cover 3 days' distance in a matter of hours. If it doesn't, we'll be scattered across several quantum realities. Astrid's hands moved to her own controls, helping plot the approach. My father always said I had a poor sense of self-preservation. I suppose he was right. The pursuing ships had realized their mistake and were rushing to intercept, but they were too late. The Phantom reached the edge of the quantum eddy, its hull already beginning to resonate with the chaotic energies. Last chance to object, Your Highness, Ethan said, his hands poised over the final command sequence. Astrid's response was to reach over and initiate the sequence herself. I trust you, Commander, she said simply. The ship plunged into the quantum eddy. Reality seemed to fracture around them as normal space gave way to something else entirely. Colors that shouldn't exist painted themselves across the view screen, and time itself became a suggestion rather than a constant. In the chaos, Ethan felt Astrid's hand grasp his arm. He glanced over, saw the trust in her alien eyes, and made a silent promise to prove worthy of it. They had chosen this path together, and whatever waited on the other side, they would face it the same way. The Phantom tumbled through quantum space, carrying its precious cargo of truth and hope toward an uncertain destination. Behind them, Valen's ships could only watch as their quarry vanished into the impossible, leaving them to wonder what would emerge on the other side, and what changes it would bring to both their worlds. Inside the ship, as reality twisted around them, Ethan and Astrid held their course together, their differences seeming less important with each passing moment. They had started this journey as reluctant allies from different worlds. But in the heart of quantum chaos, something else was taking shape, a partnership that might just change the course of two civilizations. Reality reasserted itself like a hammer striking an anvil. The Phantom burst from quantum space in a cascade of impossible colors, its experimental hull groaning from stresses it was never meant to endure. Warning lights painted the cockpit in crimson as multiple systems verged on failure. Damage report, Ethan managed, his voice hoarse. The quantum transit had felt like being turned inside out while someone explained advanced mathematics in a language that didn't exist. Astrid shook her head, her silvery skin showing unusual patterns, quantum exposure effects, presumably. Primary systems at 30%. Stealth systems offline. Weapons. She managed a weak laugh. Let's just say we'd better not get into another fight. Where are we? Ethan brought up the navigation display, trying to get their bearings. The stars looked wrong, shifted from their usual positions by their quantum leap. We're here. Astrid's voice held wonder as she pointed to a nearby station, their target, the abandoned diplomatic outpost. Your insane plan actually worked, Commander. We covered 3 days' distance in. She checked the chronometer. 4 hours, 17 minutes. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. Don't sound so surprised, Your Highness. I occasionally know what I'm doing. His smile faded as he studied the tactical display. But we're not alone. 3 ships hung in high orbit around the station. Their design was unfamiliar, neither human nor Valeran standard configuration. As the Phantom drew closer, their energy signatures became clear. Shadowborn Coalition ships, Astrid confirmed, her expression grim. My uncle's contingency plan. He knew this was our likely destination. Can we transmit the evidence from here? Astrid shook her head. The quantum communicator needs direct access. We have to dock with the station. She met his eyes. They'll be waiting for us. Ethan studied the tactical situation. The Phantom was in no shape for another battle, but they'd come too far to turn back now. Everything they'd fought for, the truth about Project Oracle, justice for the victims of Proxima, peace between their species, it all came down to reaching that communicator. "Your Highness," he said formally, "I don't suppose your combat training covered zero-gravity operations?" The patterns in Astrid's skin shifted to what he now recognized as anticipation. "Actually, Commander, that was one of my better subjects." They formulated their plan quickly, knowing time was against them. The coalition ships would have detected their arrival, and reinforcements would already be on the way. As Ethan brought the Phantom in for its approach, Astrid prepared their equipment. "These environmental suits are human design," she noted, checking the seals on hers. "The proportions are a bit off for Valeran anatomy." "Beggars can't be choosers, Your Highness." Ethan helped her adjust the suit's settings. His hands lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met through their faceplates. So much unspoken between them, and no time to say it. The Phantom docked with the station's emergency airlock, the only entry point not covered by coalition ships. As they'd expected, the station's internal gravity was offline, its corridors dark and cold. They pushed off from the airlock, propelling themselves through the weightless environment with practiced movements. "Life signs ahead," Astrid whispered over their suit comm, "at least 6 hostiles, guarding the command center." "They'll be expecting us to go straight for the quantum communicator," Ethan replied. "So we won't." Instead, they made their way to the station's maintenance section. Ethan had studied the specifications of these diplomatic outposts during his military career. Their basic layout hadn't changed in decades. He found what he was looking for: an auxiliary power routing system. "This will give them something to think about," he said, rerouting power from emergency systems to create a cascade of failures across the station. Alarms blared in the distance as sections began losing pressure and environmental controls went haywire. They moved through the chaos, using the confusion to their advantage. When they encountered coalition troops, Astrid proved her zero-gravity combat training was indeed exemplary. She moved like she was born in space, using the environment itself as a weapon. They reached the command center to find it sealed and guarded. Through the reinforced windows, they could see more troops inside, surrounding the quantum communicator. And there, directing them, was a face Ethan recognized from Astrid's evidence files: Victor Roscoff, Earth's representative to Project Oracle and one of the conspiracy's leaders. "Cutting it rather close, aren't you?" Roscoff's voice came through their suit comms. "Valen warned me you might try something like this. I must admit, that quantum eddy trick was impressive. But it ends here." "It's over, Victor," Astrid called back. "We have proof of everything: the weapons development, the false flag attacks, Proxima. Stand down, and you can still make a deal." "A deal?" Roscoff laughed. "Your Highness, we're beyond deals. War is coming, whether you like it or not. The only question is whether you'll live to see it." Ethan had heard enough. While Astrid kept them distracted, he'd been working on the command center's environmental controls. With a few final commands, he vented the atmosphere from the chamber. The coalition troops, caught off guard, scrambled for emergency gear. In the confusion, Ethan and Astrid breached the door. What followed was chaos in 3 dimensions. Zero-gravity combat was like a deadly dance, where every action had an equal and opposite reaction. Ethan and Astrid moved in perfect synchronization, covering each other as they fought their way to the communicator. Roscoff proved to be more capable than expected, using a magnetic weapon that played havoc with their suit systems. A lucky shot caught Ethan in the leg, damaging his suit's mobility controls. He spun helplessly, trying to reorient himself.